ready, Ed? Ready as we'll ever be. Reg? Let's do it. Very well. As I hope is apparent by now, I love fantasy and science fiction. No matter what other genres I delve into, I always at some point find myself drawn back to these two. Why? Well, lots of reasons, but one of the big ones is because of how much I love the worlds that they create. Anytime I read a fantasy story, one of my favorite things to do is look at the front of the book to see if there's a map of the fantasy world somewhere. Lots of books will include these, and I love just perusing the map, looking at all of the places in this world, some of which we'll visit, some of which we won't, but all of which help to reinforce this perceived reality of this world. And even if these books don't include a map, which is often the case, the internet has made searching for information about these worlds that much easier. Timelines, descriptions of characters and creatures, rules that govern these worlds, and of course the mythology of each universe. Sometimes the world becomes a story in and of itself, and sometimes it's just fascinating to explore that story and learn little tidbits of knowledge that help to expand our understanding of the main story. Today we're going to be looking at one of those fantasy worlds, one that we've actually been looking at steadily over the past month as I've been reviewing the games in the Myst series. The world of Myst and of the Dunny has been slowly revealed to us over the course of the last 25 years. Between 5 games, 3 books, and a wealth of information and an online interactive experience, we have come to learn more and more about this race of people and an underground civilization devoted to discovery, exploration, and the art of writing links to new ages. And in this video, we won't be looking so much at the individual stories, but how they contribute to our understanding of the world they live in. So if you're not completely sick of me talking about this yet, join me, Reg, and Ed as we look at the world of the Dunny. Dunny. Whatever. As is the case with each of the individual Myst games, the story of this world is one of exploration. With each story, our circle of understanding widens a little bit more beyond this mysterious island and the cryptic storyline we found in the first game. As such, I want to talk a little bit about how our understanding of this world has evolved over time, and as this is about the Dunny, we're going to divide this up into 5 eras. Actually, the word era is kind of misleading because we're not actually going to look at these stories in strict chronological order, but rather group them together thematically with how they developed our understanding of the world. So first we have the original Myst game, which as the name implies is specifically designed to be mysterious. In the beginning we know nothing. The only hint that we have of a wider world here is the opening monologue, which I'm actually going to have Reg read for us in its entirety. Reg? I realized the moment I fell into the fissure that the book would not be destroyed as I had planned. It continued falling into that starry expanse of which I had only a fleeting glimpse. I have tried to speculate where it might have landed, but I must admit that such conjecture is futile. Still, questions about whose hands might one day hold my Myst book are unsettling to me. I know my apprehensions might never be allayed, and so I close, realizing that perhaps the ending has not yet been written. Without any context, that monologue is basically meaningless. The only thing that we really glean from it is the fact that this book, the Myst book, is important somehow. It was meant to have been destroyed when the narrator fell into the fissure, but obviously it was not. You find it, you use it, and it ends up being your gateway into the world of Myst. But this world that you discover in this first game is one that you really only see the barest hints of. It's a world of age writing, where books can be written that provide links to other worlds. It's a world of discovery and exploration and the scientific method as we see in the various devices and journals in this world. And it's a world of hubris and megalomania as we see in the storylines of Cirrus and Achenar. These will all end up being trademarks of the Dunny civilization, but at this point we don't really know what that means. We know there's a place called Dunny, provided that you get to that point of the game, but we don't know anything else about the Dunny civilization. We don't know if this ability to write ages is unique to Atreus and his family, and we don't even know that Atreus is from the same world that we're from, or from a completely different world. As far as we're concerned, Dunny is just another age to visit, and one that we don't even see that much of. The circle began to expand in the second era when we got 2 stories that helped to fill in some of the gaps in Atreus' story. First we have Myst, the Book of of Atreus, which, as the name implies, is the story of Atreus' life and actually ends on that monologue that we hear at the beginning of the Myst game. Given that, it would seem as though this book was a lead-up to the game of Myst, and indeed, the book does introduce us to the island of Myst and to the series of events that lead to Atreus dropping the book in the fissure and to the stranger eventually finding it. But the book actually gives us more background into the second game in the series, Riven. Cirrus and Arcana are mentioned only briefly in the epilogue, and for most of the story, they haven't even been born yet. The focus is on Atreus' life, his childhood, adolescence, and young adulthood, how he discovered the Dunny civilization and learned how to write ages, how he met his wife Catherine, and most importantly, his relationship with his father, Gen. It's also here that we start to learn a little bit more about the Dunny civilization, although at this point, of course, the Dunny civilization has long since died out. We don't get a lot of details into the civilization yet, and those that we do get, we get from Gen, who was only a child when the Dunny civilization died out, and so his memories might not be all that reliable. We're also given our first indication of a theme that will run its course through the story of the Dunny, that of racial superiority. Gen believes that as a writer of ages, he is in fact a creator of worlds, a god of some sort to the people living in these ages, and that he, and by extension the Dunny, are therefore a superior race. Atreus, who was raised by his grandmother, who herself was an outsider to the Dunny civilization, sees age writing quite a bit differently, more as an act of exploration. And this back and forth between dominating other cultures and exploring and learning more about them is very much central to the story of the Dunny. Riven then completes the story of Atreus, Catherine, and Gen. It doesn't reveal as many insights about the world of the Dunny, but it does reveal more about Gen and his relationship to that world. Gen obviously worships the Dunny people and is attempting, in Riven, to recreate that civilization on that age. So ultimately, while we do continue to learn more about the world of the Dunny, the focus of the circle is still on Atreus and his family, completing the drama that was started in Myst, the Book of Atreus. And in fact, the Myst game has less to do with that storyline as it does to introducing you, the stranger, to this world. And as I said in an earlier video, that would have been more than enough for me. I would have been perfectly satisfied to leave the world of the Dunny completely mysterious, just a backdrop for the story of fathers and sons. And indeed, the next era saw the release of 2 more stories, both of them books, that delved a little bit more deeper into this civilization and actually showed us the civilization for the first time. In Myst, the Book of Tiana, we learn the story of Anna, Atreus' grandmother, later called Tiana by the Dunny, a surface dweller who explored and eventually found the Dunny civilization and ended up staying there and marrying one of the members of the Dunny civilization who was also called Atreus. Between these two characters, Atreus and Anna, we get a pretty clear picture of the Dunny civilization in its prime and also what led it to eventually fall. We also see a very young Gen, his early childhood, and how the fall of the Dunny might have affected him later in life. Obviously, this book acts as a prequel to the Myst games and Myst, the Book of Atreus, while in contrast, the third book, Myst, the Book of Dunny, takes place after the events of Riven, where Atreus and Catherine attempt to find the surviving members of the Dunny and the various ages that were left behind in the hopes of eventually rebuilding the civilization. In the course of this book, we are given yet another perspective on the Dunny, both their ingenuity and desire for exploration and discovery, and also the hubris that eventually led to their downfall. I like the Book of Tiana well enough, and although the Book of Dunny is a little bit tedious for me, both of them give us even more information about this world, fleshing it out and helping us to understand the characters and the world a little bit better, and reinforcing a lot of those themes that we saw in the first 3 stories. And again, things could have easily ended there. A nice trilogy with some supplementary material added on. That I can get behind. But it was during this time period that Rand and Robin Miller really wanted to expand this world further, to tell a new set of stories and to create a more immersive experience in this world. Myst, the Book of Dunny started us in that direction, introducing us to the idea of rebuilding the Dunny civilization, writing the age Relishon, and very briefly at the end of the book, Atreus and Catherine's daughter, Yisha. And it was at this point that things started to get a little muddled, as the Miller brothers went off to work on Uru and left the development of further Myst games to other game studios. And in order to do what they wanted to do in Uru, this was going to require some things to be established, and in some cases retconned, into the world of Myst and the Dunny that they had already established. Thus, we have 3 games that help to accomplish this: Exile, Revelation, and Real Myst, which is essentially just Myst, but set in real time and in a 3D environment, like maybe what the Miller brothers would have done had the technology existed to do this in 1993. But in addition, they also add some new elements to the Myst game that help to fit it in with the new world that they were creating. First, although you kind of have to hunt for this, there is a gravestone for Anna, Atreus' grandmother. It will later be explained how she died and how that death really affected the family dynamic between Atreus and Catherine and Cirrus and Achenar, and how that might have led to the events of Myst. But more important is an additional age called Rhyme, which you can unlock if you complete the game correctly, kind of like a bonus level. Playing through this age will ultimately give you your first glimpse of Riven, both in the sense that you will see it, and also in the sense that you'll get a little bit of a sense of the storyline leading up to that game. In addition, you get a little bit more backstory about Cirrus and Achenar and their relationship to their father leading up to the events of Revelation. Exile, as mentioned before, is kind of a suspension from this world. It doesn't really add much to the story other than to give us some of the real-life consequences of the things that Cirrus and Achenar did. And even though we save the Age of Relishon, the age that Atreus wrote for the Dunny, we don't even get to go there at any point. We get a little bit of insight into the art of age writing, but in a very sort of abstract way. And then of course there's Revelation, which, as I mentioned in that review, acts as something of a bridge to the events of Uru and End of Ages. We start to see Yisha at what will prove to be the beginning of a very long and storied career as a talented age writer, mostly in her relationship to the people of Serenia. Overall, though, these games don't give us much more of an insight into the Dunny people. They just sort of expand the story of Atreus and his family. Now, Uru was actually released between Exile and Revelation, but I'm including it as part of the last era, the 5th era of this world, because it fits more thematically in with End of Ages than it does with the other games. These games give us our widest understanding of the Dunny people yet, looking at this civilization and the events of the other Myst games from the distance of 2 centuries. Both of these games show us ages that weren't written by Atreus or Catherine or any of the characters that we've met in previous Myst games, but rather by other members of the Dunny civilization. And it shows us many facets of who the Dunny people really were, which we had seen hints of in the stories of Atreus and his family. In Myst 5, we see a prison age along the lines of what we saw in Spire and Haven in the game Revelation, and it indicates that prison ages were probably more the norm for the Dunny than the prison book that we saw in Riven. In that same game, we see an age called Lachion, where the Dunny forced the people of that age to perform a ritual that was sacred to them, but turned into kind of a sport for the Dunny. We see a darker side of the Dunny in these ages, indicating that Cirrus and Achenar and Gen weren't just anomalies. They weren't just awful people, but awful people indicative of the awful aspects of the culture that they came from. When you decide the fate of the tablet in End of Ages, you're really deciding the fate of the Dunny people. Will they be more like Atreus and Catherine and Yisha, or will they be more like Cirrus and Achenar and Gen? Now, Uru, even though I'm not crazy about the game itself, does lead up to the events of Myst 5, and it puts the world in a different perspective that I think ties together these disparate parts in a really interesting way. So the basic premise behind Uru is that the Dunny civilization that we've seen in the Myst games and the Myst novels is actually a real thing. That in our actual real world, there once existed an underground civilization that could write links to other ages. In the other Myst games, you're playing this character known as the Stranger, but in Uru, you're actually meant to be playing yourself. This not only continues the immersive experience of the Myst games, but the fact that they are, at heart, games of exploration and discovery. According to the lore of the game, the Dunny civilization was actually discovered back in the 80s, and then in the 90s, they approached Rand and Robin Miller to design this game, Myst, which was based on many of their findings, most of them from journals written by Catherine. The other games and novels that followed then continued this story in a sort of vaguely fictionalized account of a real thing. And even though the game Uru is kind of meh to me, I do feel like it ties together everything really nicely for this world. If we consider that as the basis for everything, the various continuity gaps between games actually kind of make sense. Myst was created back when we still didn't know everything, when discoveries were still being made, and they were just trying to make an entertaining game, so they didn't give us all of the information, and maybe they didn't even get a few of the details right, like whether Cirrus and Achenar were trapped in prison books or prison ages. With each subsequent story, we add a little bit more and we understand the world a little bit better, until by Myst 5 we have what is basically the conclusion to one long story of discovery. Maybe some of the puzzle pieces are still missing and maybe some of them don't fit very well at all, but that's going to be true of any discovery of something ancient. You're going to discover something later that maybe will contradict something you believed to be true earlier. In that way, the games themselves become this story about exploration, of how much we knew about the Dunny at any given time. It's the best way I can think of to explain the discontinuity between various stories, but on the whole, I think it works. Ultimately though, I myself prefer the world of the Dunny when it was still mostly wrapped in mystery. While the Dunny civilization is fascinating in its own way, I feel like it's more fascinating the more mysterious it is. And really, mystery is another engaging aspect of the games, the fact that we just don't know everything. It leaves room for us to speculate and fill in the gaps on our own. Even after 25 years, I still find that mystery fascinating, and maybe it's the old nostalgic fuddy-duddy in me, but in the end, I will probably continue to revisit the Myst that I knew from my childhood, as opposed to whatever story is happening now. That's my take, of course, but I know that I have a few viewers at least who have played through these games as well and who are as interested in the world of the Dunny as I am, and I'm interested to hear your thoughts and preferences and how much of this continuity you feel you can accept. I look forward to reading your comments, and until next time, friends, neighbors, and fellow VEDSies, I'll see you tomorrow. Things have stabilized, and seems like we're that much closer to landing in the genre. You were right. Collaboration is the key. What do you mean? What are you guys talking about? See, the genre effect is strongest when the personas collaborate together. It got its start with Books vs. Movies reviews, which is a collaboration between you and Hatter, and almost every video that the genres have affected has been some sort of collaboration. The videos they don't affect as much are the ones where it's just one persona talking, which is why the TARDIS hasn't been able to land in a genre yet. This suspension is keeping you all separate from each other, but thanks to our collaboration together, we're getting a little bit closer to where we need to be. Okay, sure. So what do we need to do to get there? Well, now that we've established contact with each other, we should be able to find the others as well. Collaborating helps, but I have a feeling if we're really going to get out of this, we're going to need a really big collaboration. One video that somehow involves all the personas together. I think you're right. We'll have to think about what we all can do. Yeah, some sort of review that involves everyone. I just can't think what that would be. Guys? Yeah, it'll have to be a story that crosses so many mediums that everyone can get involved. Guys. We'll have to put a lot of thought and planning into this. It's gonna take a long time. Guys, it's actually a way easier solution. Really? Sure. It's still VEDS, right? What do we always do during VEDS? Upload videos late? Get way too elaborate with the storyline? Stress out over getting all the videos done? Spend all of our free time editing? No. Guys, the Q&A? People always ask questions of the personas. It usually involves everybody, even characters we haven't seen in years. How did we miss that? I don't know, maybe because the two of you overthink everything and are largely responsible for the convoluted nature of this storyline? Okay, so I guess we're doing the Q&A. I'll track down the others as best I can. Should be able to do it in a few days. We'll be cutting it close, but I think this could work.